The objective is that we come up with recommendations and targets that guide policymakers in the important to-dos on how to promote capacity building on MSP in the next decade to come. My name is Angela Schulz-Sehn. I will be the moderator of this session, facilitator, but I will also sort of give an introductory note in terms of, giving us the flair into this session. And I'm not here on my own, of course. I have a distinct panel here, really, with worldwide experience from Europe, from Mexico, Asia, Vietnam, and Mauritius. And, some of them have also studied somewhere else. So I think that we have, sort of a good, really a huge sort of choice to pick on from worldwide experience. So before, let's really kick it off. I don't see my PowerPoint yet, but I mean, this gives me the opportunity to sort of introduce myself. My name is Angela Schulz-Sehn, and it's really a great pleasure for me to be here and to be the facilitator of this institutional capacity development session, given the fact that my story in MSP started in 2001 with the project Baltic, where we really started to develop the first sea use plan up in the north of Mecklenburg-Vorpommern. And 2001 was also the year where we founded our company, Sustainable Projects, which is not only, why is it Sustainable Projects? It's not only about projects for sustainable development, but it's also for projects which have a sustainable output. And I think that this conference here shows that we have been on the right track with regards to maritime spatial planning. 2001 is, however, also the year where my son was born, and I think that is always giving me quite a good check on where are we with MSP, where is he now? And sort of, in the early years, I had to sort of educate him, and he started to walk, but I talked to him yesterday, and of course now he's a teenager, 15, 16 years old, and, wants to go dancing, wants to go out, and in fact he comes back with questions to me, and with new tools, and with new communication ways, etc. So I think that this is the new generation, and I have also a lot to learn from him and to listen. And but I'm afraid that being 15 years old, that it takes me another 10 years or so to actually guide him a little bit, and also to give him a little bit of financial support until he really will stand on his own feet. And I think the same goes a little bit with maritime spatial planning and the story. So let's, kick it off with institutional capacity, what it's all about. I mean, we have heard that was sort of complex. MSP is complex, and all of you are aware of these cycles, the steps, and what is all implied, and it gets even more complex and complicated when we sort of take the transnational, transnational aspect into it. But at the same time, who are the institutions which really then carry MSP? And here you see sort of the list of the authorities which have been picked after the adoption of the MSP directive throughout Europe, who are sort of, hosting the MSP authority. And you see the big range of different kind of ministries stemming from either ministries of environment or ministry of transport, but also Ministry of Finance in Estonia is responsible for MSP implementation. And I think that when we come to institutional capacity building, we also have to sort of take into account this background, this cultural background, that these institutions really have very different background, very different skills in-house, different capacities in order to carry out maritime spatial planning. And, from that, one can really see clearly that, and this was mentioned here as well, is that, of course, it's not one single institution. It may be one institution which is in the lead, but that, in fact, you really have to sort of work on a cross-sectoral basis across institutions on a multi-level basis with regions across to national scale and then transnational scale. So, I mean, this is on the institutional level. At the same time, of course, you also need a team people who are really sort of doing maritime spatial planning. And here you see sort of the whole variety of knowledge and skills, which are necessary, which are in order to really do a good MSP process, being it, communication, listening also, but also analytical skills. It's not only data skills, but also visionary skills, but also somebody who's really coordinating the whole process and, then also knows something about logical framework, perhaps, in order to set the right objectives. So where are these people then coming from? And, here the issue is really also, since we talk also about finance and how expensive is an MSP process to carry through, is that, and is there such a thing as a maritime spatial planner? Is there a person who could sort of, have all these knowledge and skills in one person? No, that's not the point. I mean, we have listened to that already on day 1 and day 2, that of course it's a team sport, and you need to bring together variety of skills and variety of professions, carrying through this MSP process. And what is important in terms of worldwide MSP process is that this may sort of be a list which sort of, frightens you, and, in terms of, what the finance is sort of required. But actually, we are not talking about always 100% staff. I mean, this is really sort of that you need perhaps 20% of the time of a lawyer, or sometimes a communication expert. It doesn't need to be all in-house. I have already mentioned you should work with your other fellow institutions, but you can also draw in NGOs. You can also bring in specialists, and we have heard about this already. So where, however, is this knowledge coming from? This is just this list of handbooks we all know about. Some of them have been involved in sort of developing them, which, however, just sort of gives sort of steps. I mean, we have heard it's all learning by doing. And, eventually you have to really sort of carry your MSP process yourself. And here comes sort of the story of projects in, and what is the role of projects in terms of institutional capacity building, knowledge building, because MSP is still in its infancy, or it's still a teenager, and we have to somehow generate also new knowledge. And this is just sort of the brief history of MSP projects in the Baltic Sea region, which was very lucky that it had a whole series of MSP projects going through. And what is the advantage of this kind of serious projects, which are sort of building up on each other, is that with projects you have documented knowledge after a project. And with this, series of projects, it was also a continuous building up of capacities. People are still here in the room who have started it off in 2001, but of course, others have moved out of the process. And there's this continuous lot of people sort of coming in into the process. And how do we not have to tell the story all over again, and sort of, how to bring them into this process? But I think it's also very important to always mix new people in there in order to really then have this knowledge generation and to build on these projects from one to each other. But, how to do this when people are moving? How can we sort of, document this knowledge? What was important in the Baltic Sea region, and is still important, is we had heard this yesterday already, that there are institutions like HELCOM and especially also VASAP, which really sort of, had this kind of continuous coordinating body, and who were sort of calling for projects and then sort of, then also taking them on board. So in terms of the history and the generation of projects here, is that, now we are with Baltic Lines in North Sea. It's the first sister projects ongoing, and it's really about sort of future assessments looking into 2030 beyond. What is sort of the implication of energy developments or shipping developments from 2030? And what are the spatial implications? And of course, this is not sort of, probably a sample for the whole worldwide, but I mean, of course, these projects also give resources. They provide resources to MSP authorities, and what is important to note here is that at the time, on 2001, it was sort of that, of course, there were not always MSP authorities everywhere around, but in fact, those who are now implementing MSP are very often sort of now taking this capacity which has been developed on board and make use of these capacities. So I skip that. So in fact, there's this whole, plethora of projects around, and how can one capitalize on them? And when the MSP directive came out, there are of course more countries now sort of starting with the MSP process, and how can one sort of benefit from the experience which has already been taken place? And this is how the MSP platform has sort of come about, the MSP assistance mechanism, which is really sort of a repository of sort of the experience which has already been made in MSP, and to really break this down into sort of distinct practices. So you can really look there in terms of, hey, how have others done EBA? How have they gone on in stakeholder engagement? Yesterday we had the communication workshop. So what kind of communication tools have worked, which have not worked? And you can also then check in terms of countries, really in the Baltic Sea, in the Europe, with the countries sort of really pointing out to which practices they have made use of in their MSP processes. And they may even come from research, they may come from earlier projects, and you can really check here. And it's also sort of, about FAQs, it's about questions and answers. One has to stress there is not one single answer when it comes to MSP, and that's why there is not a single answer on that platform, but it's sort of a new entry point into sort of looking into sort of the various practices which are around. What is important about these platforms, there is a lot of knowledge around, but there is also still a lot of knowledge to be generated. And this was sort of a survey we did among the EU member states on where do they want to exchange knowledge, where do they have a need, and is that sort of reflected in sort of the knowledge which is already documented. So in fact, it's more than a platform. It's actually really also an active knowledge sharing exercise. And we are now going more into workshops. We will now have one on Malta, on land sea interaction. We go into blue growth issues. We go into how to do EBA. And it's really here that member states are coming together and exchange experience. And this is my last slide, but it's also about generating new knowledge. And, last year, we have really looked into all the projects and MSP initiatives which have been going on in Europe and sort of deconstructed them and said, okay, what kind of data is needed? What is sort of used by MSP authorities? What kind of data would they like to have? And what kind of assessment tools are out there? And sort of this is then now made available, of course, not only for EU member states, but also all others can share it on this platform. And now we are going into a new exercise where we really sort of will look into how can we sort of go on about sort of constructing visions, doing visions, and how can we sort of find indicators for sustainable blue planning. So this was my introductory note, and having said all that, that was very much on institutional capacity building. I would like to give the floor now to our first speaker, to Joseph Amsong, and who is from the research assistant at the Centre for Marine Renewable Energy in Ireland, University College Cork, and who has been participating in the Erasmus Mundus program and is now sort of project manager or involved in the SimCal project, and in fact has worked in Ghana. So Joseph, please share your experience with us.
Thanks, Angela, and thanks to the organizers for the invitation. So my role in this session is to present to you something about MSP education. So I've had the opportunity to be involved in the Erasmus Mundus Master Course on Maritime Spatial Planning, and thanks to everyone who is supporting and also preparing and training the next generation of planners too as well. So I'm coming from the Centre for Marine and Renewable Energy in Ireland. So just to kick off the presentation, we've talked about how complex MSP is. And just to emphasize this, I just wanted to show these two pictures. And it's actually a quote from Andrea Moff. And she says something about MSP. She tries to compare terrestrial planning and MSP too as well. And this is what she says, that MSP is not like terrestrial planning. So in terrestrial planning, she compares it to cutting a cake into small portions. But instead, MSP is cooking a soup in which all the ingredients are mixed together, and they are supposed to influence each other. So that's how complex MSP is. And coming from a terrestrial planning background, I found this very much interesting. So this brings about the topic about adaptive management. And I agree with Fred Emery over here that instead of constantly adapting to change, why not change to be adaptive? I think that it's about that time that we have to be adaptive in our processes, and we need institutions. These institutions serve as the pillars for adaptive management, and I think it's important that we build institutional capacities for MSP too as well. So in Europe, I believe that there was a lot done, as Angela has talked to us about, on MSP and institutional capacity development, but I think the MSP directive actually spurred on a lot of processes. So at that point, MSP moved from being a management tool to actually having legal backing. And I think that through that, there's been a lot of institutionalization of MSP as well. There's been the transposition of the MSP directive into various national laws and also regulation, the creation of competent authorities as well. This has led to a lot of education on MSP. We can talk about the various Erasmus courses, MSP-related Erasmus courses, the various national MSP courses too as well. Then there's been knowledge research, networking, and also partnership in the area of MSP. Then finally, sharing of knowledge, data, experience through the EU MSP platform, as Angela already talked to us about. So I've had the opportunity of being involved in two of these approaches. So first of all, in the education side of it, then after using it in a project environment. So this presentation is supposed to be about my experience from the education aspect, then transitioning it into the cross-border MSP project as well. So when we look at the various MSP-related courses in Europe, we find that there are about 37 MSP-related courses all across Europe. And from survey from GC and Vibero, it found that it's evenly distributed across Europe. And I think 4 of them are Erasmus Mundus courses, where scholarships are given to students to be involved in the studying of these courses as well. 7 of them are transnational partnership too as well. And most of them are being developed at the master's level, probably because I think MSP-related courses are transdisciplinary, so more of these ones are being developed, most especially 62% of them are being developed at that level. And this brings me to how I got involved in this course, which was the Erasmus Mundus Master's course on Maritime Spatial Planning, which is coordinated by University of Venice IUAV, then also by the University of Sevilla and also the University of Azores. So in the year 2013, I got involved with this course. I got a scholarship to study the course. Then I met these amazing people, these flying people, some of them who are already in the room right now. So coming from 14 different countries, 4 different continents, trying to study MSP, and I believe that it was a great experience. I mean, going beyond forming lifelong friendship, I think that from an educational point of view, it was also very much important because we were coming from various backgrounds. Some of us were architects, some of us were planners, some of us were geographers, and I think this helped a lot into developing that transdisciplinarity that we talk about in MSP, because you learn from another person from a different background, and we share ideas during group meetings, and I think this was very much important. Going on from that, I think the course had a very good layout in terms of mobility between universities too as well. So we started the first semester in the University of Sevilla, in Sevilla. Then moved on to the second semester in the University of Azores in Ponta Delgada. Then in the third semester, we had internship. And I believe this was important in terms of getting experience on MSP. Then after, we went to the University of Venice for the 4th semester. It's interesting to go to all these places, but from an educational point of view, I think this was very much important in terms of knowing about the different geographies that exist, because I believe it's very much important to understand the geography within which you are in and how MSP can be applied. So we went from the Western Mediterranean to the Eastern Mediterranean to an Icelandic place too as well, which all informed our education in MSP, especially learning from the different projects that the universities are working on as well. And just to emphasize on the internship aspect too, many of us had the opportunity to work at different places to gain a lot of knowledge on MSP. And I believe that when we came back after our internship, our group discussion was much more richer because we could share experiences from different places on different projects, and we could learn from each other too as well. So the MSP course was developed in 2013. Then the directive came out in 2014. So for me, it was interesting to look at what are the course models and how does this compare to some of the educational elements of the MSP directive. So I just had it in mind to juxtapose the two of them. And I don't think we have enough time to go into all the various levels of it. But I think that I can emphasize on some particular aspects of the course that I found it very interesting, especially when it comes to applied knowledge or learning by doing. I believe that because MSP at that time was a new concept, I think you can only learn by doing it. If you don't do it, you learn, you do it, and you make mistakes and you learn from it. I think this was exemplified through the internships that we had and also through the planning workshop. I believe that you can learn all the theories, but during the planning workshops, we were supposed to apply some of the things that we learned in the theory into the practical aspects. And we got the opportunity at the University of Venice to be involved a bit in the ADRI-Plan project as well, where we were working with real issues. And I think this helped us in our educational development too as well. Just moving on from there, because of time, after all the talk, has the course contributed to MSP workforce? And in the survey done by students who have finished the course, 61% are now in MSP-related jobs, which I think is very much important. And from the statistics, 57.1% said that is the course that contributed to them getting into that position, which I believe means that the course is doing a good job in terms of bringing out the next generation of planners as well. And this led me into one of the cross-border EU projects. There are 6 of them. This is one of them in the Celtic Sea, which is about the SimCelt. So SimCelt is about supporting implementation of MSP in the Celtic Sea, which is being led by the University College Cork, and it says 7 partners from 3 member states, which is Ireland, the UK, and also France. So beyond supporting the implementation of MSP, I believe that we are also fostering cross-border engagement and cross-border cooperation. And member states or partner states are supposed to draw on these experiences to also support the implementation of MSP at the various national levels. So what has this project done in terms of supporting cooperation? I believe that a lot is being done beyond just ensuring that there is great communication, there is effective communication between various partners from very different backgrounds. I believe that it's also fostering also joint learning. Yesterday we talked about co-learning and also co-creation, which I think is very much important, so that practitioners are involved in coming out with methodologies. So it's not like research institutions are coming out with methodologies, but practitioners are involved. To some extent, I would say the end users are also involved in tailoring methodologies and applying it to how their particular context too as well. Then I also think that it's very much interesting in terms of engaging of officials, researchers, to overcome their disciplines, the discipline boundaries, because I believe that sometimes we can be very stuck on our disciplines, that it's important to move away from the various disciplines that we are coming from to engage and also with each other to develop common approaches and also common methodologies. Just moving on to my concluding remarks. I think that there should be training diversification. There should be various ways to meet the demands of professionals. There could be webinars, there could be seminars, there could be summer schools to also encourage MSP education as well. And I also believe that the models of MSP should be able to address the multidisciplinarity of MSP as well. And this is particularly in the case of engaging students from different backgrounds. And I think from the paper by GC and Biberi was realized that the entry level for most of these MSP-related courses are still within the disciplinary background. And I think students from different backgrounds should be engaged in MSP. I also believe that cross-border MSP capacity building should go beyond engaging the actors at the top level, to start engaging the actors and at the administrative sectors, because I think when it comes to cooperation, much of it is done at that level. So to engage these sectors in the whole process of MSP. Then there's also one aspect about the governance system for MSP. And I believe that we all want to come out with a plan, but to make the plan work, I think it's going to work within a particular governance system. And you need, as a planner, to understand this system to make sure that your plans are going to be enforceable and you can be able to implement. So I believe this should be a core model in the MSP education on how to understand the governance system within a particular place. And with this, I say thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Joseph. I was supposed to sort of ask you still sort of a specific question in terms of your presentation, but I think you have almost answered it all in your presentation. Yeah. But still, sort of, in terms of, recommendations, the main recommendations, I appreciate that you really liked Erasmus Mundus and that you sort of marvel about it. But I mean, in terms of, what would you change, or in terms of, new aspects which should come in, and what kind of lessons in terms of training development worldwide would you sort of take from this, your experience in Erasmus Mundus? What would be your recommendation?
I think studying the course and getting into a work environment, one thing I realized was about stakeholder engagement. I got to realize that stakeholder engagement is very useful and very important in the MSP process. So I think a lot of attention should go into that direction too as well when it comes to facilitation, communication, especially getting involved in the cross-border MSP too as well. I think you will need a lot of these skills when you get to that level too as well. In terms of this initiative being applied elsewhere, I think funding is very important. I think we went from one university to the other because we're on scholarships to be able to do that. And I think if such an initiative could be replicated somewhere, I think there needs to be a lot of funding going into that aspect too as well. And I think these courses should also be built on experiences and how to have the practical knowledge on MSP as well. And I think this is very, very important. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Joseph.
Thank you.
I think we will move on with the next presentation. I already see that there are sort of questions coming in via, now you all are familiar with it, with the Slido. I think we take these questions after we have had all the presentations. And on that note, I would like to give the floor to Norma Patricia Munoz Sevilla from Mexico, the National Polytechnic Institute. Norbert, you have studied in France. You have many, many awards and, have written many books. But, I mean, you will especially, today sort of share your experience with MSP projects in Mexico and also, what kind of capacity needs you have come across.
Thank you, Angela. Good morning to everyone. Thank you very much for the kind invitation to be here today with you to share what we are doing and what we were doing in the past for the MSP in Mexico. I will run like the time because I have too many. Well, that I will skip. That is the content of my presentation. Well, I want to show you, like somebody did yesterday, where is Mexico? I think that in our time, everybody, or almost everybody knows where Mexico is because of the situation that we have now. Here we have some information about what Mexico has. You can see that if we take in account the EEZ, we have more marine surface than land, and for that reason we have very high responsibility to take care of this area. Mexico is a country surrounded by water, like you see. The Atlantic Ocean to the east through the Gulf of Mexico, and to the Pacific side where you can see the Gulf of California too. What is important too is that we have a very long coastal line that we need to take care of. After that, I want to share with you the dimension of two of the main water bodies in our country. The Gulf of Mexico, that has more than 1.5 million square kilometers, and the Gulf of California, 250,000 square kilometers. Then you can see that to make a planning with those kind of water bodies is very important and complicated. Well, Mexico is one of the mega diverse countries in the world. That is a responsibility too. We have so many ecosystems, very important ones, you can see. And we have NPA, coastal and marine, a bigger area than Costa Rica as a country. Well, for that reason, we have so many stakeholders, activities, and sectors that use the seaside or the coastal area. You can see as stakeholders, well, you have a conservation group that is very important, that was working with us, activities like fisheries or tourism. And we have a very important group in Mexico that is indigenous people. We have a lot of indigenous people living on the coastal area, and they have their own rules, their own constitutions, and their own vision of the world. Economic activities, the two Gulfs that we have, they are very different in activities. The Gulf of Mexico is mainly oil production with fisheries and other activities, and the Gulf of California is more tourism and fisheries too, of course. Port development, you have a lot in the Gulf of Mexico, industrial ports, very important like Veracruz, but on the Pacific side, in the south of Mexico, we have Salina Cruz, that is a very important port too. We have other economic activities, and one of the main activities that is very important for us in the coastal area is agriculture, because the north of Mexico is one of the biggest area for crop productions. Then we have troubles with the farmers, we have problems with the cattle, and we have other things like fisheries and aquaculture, like many other people, and the salt mining too, in Baja California. And for that reason, we are not out of the risk, the conflicts and problems in our coast and in our seaside. Then you can see that we have pollution, of course. We have overfishing in both of the Gulfs, and so on, that I will skip. That is to show you, because people is talking about if they have only one entrance to give a solution for a project in the area, and that we had it too. And we had it, you can see in this picture, that every point is a ministry, and every activity that you want to follow or you want to establish in the coastal area means at least 2 ministries. And the more complicated, they need more than 7 to take a decision if the project is going or not. Then that was the reason that my colleague Antonio, that is here in that time, the general director of the environmental policy in the Ministry of Environment, decided to create a commission, interministerial commission, and that we call it CIMARES. And when we were starting the MSP process, of course, the question was how we can handle the system. Like many countries, we have 3 levels: federal, state, and municipality level. That is a little complicated in a country with 32 states. And we have a lot of laws, at least 38 national laws, and from there to downstairs we have a lot of more. The legal framework is not only national, but we have other compromises, international compromises to follow, like conventions, protocols, or other laws, international laws that Mexico has signed. Then you can see the last one, that is the general law for the ecological equilibrium and environmental protection, is the law that normally we use to make a lot of planning, like environmental ecological ordinance, we call the MSP in Mexico, ecological ordinance, environmental assessment, the norms that we have, a lot of national norms that we are forced to follow when we are working on, and the NPS that today, like I said, they are too much. Well, at least I think that is a good one. To work on the coastal area was a very difficult situation because we know that we have a many definition of coastal zone, and we make a workshop to decide which definition, official definition, we wanted to use. And that is a definition that we had in the first environmental policy that we made at the time in 2006. That is a very important thing, and I want to tell you that the process of MSP in Mexico went from bottom to top. I mean, from stakeholders for a decision of a group that were the National Sustainable Council that was created after Rio 92 as a compromise of Mexico. And with that council, we start to work on this planning. And in this council, you have 9 sectors, including women, indigenous, young people, legislation, legislative groups, and so on. Then this is the CIMARES. You can see on the bottom the ministries. And finally, we arrived in 2010. We finished, but it was published in 2012, the National Policy for Seas and Coast of Mexico, that today has no degree, no yet. Then I will not take more time to show you because you will get the presentation. But what I want to say is that this national policy, the principles that we need to show you are very important because we are taking the ecosystem approach, the scientific basis, the adaptive is transparency and participatory, and there is coordination between intra and interinstitutional in our country. The general objectives, strategic, and then the CIMARES that is working in 20 priority projects in Mexico. Those I will skip. And we arrive here, that is one of our considerations. We have the 80% at least of the country already with MSP process. It's done. Gulf of Mexico, Gulf of California, the Caribbean area. And we are just missing now, almost done, the Central South Pacific, Mexican Pacific. But what we need now, we have the planning tool, and we need the management tool. And there we need to work, because if you have a planning tool without the management tool, it's like a dead letter. Nobody will take care of that. You can say you can do this in this area, you can do that in that area, but if there is no law, there is no regulation, it's not used. Then we need the specific coastal law that we don't have in Mexico, and we hope that with the political will and little funds, we will arrive, like Antonio told me today, that we need really to push and to build capacities in Mexico, because the stronger people in Mexico in marine sciences in the Northwest region, a little in the south, but in the Gulf of Mexico side. But really in the south, we need people to work. Otherwise, we need to move scientists from north to south, and that is sometimes not used because we are working for free. I mean, because we like to work on that. We have our own work in our universities, and we move all over the country to help the ministry to make the MSP process. Thank you very much. I am able to do some questions.
Thank you, Norma. And equally like Joseph, you actually already almost answered the question I wanted to raise in terms of, you have shown there are, many institutions in Mexico which are dealing in one way or another, or with who you have to address. But what is, in terms of capacity building, what is the main challenge, and what is sort of, also a lesson learned for other areas around the world you take?
Well, like I said, we need to have more people working in marine science, working on this kind of processes. We don't have too much. We are a big country with a big population, but marine science is not an area with a lot of scientists. And now we have another problem, because the situation of the marine energies, the new marine energies that emerge, needs to be taken in care, but we don't have people there too. Then we need to send abroad, because Mexico has no capacity to face the new energies, the marine energies. We are very new in this.
So would you be interested in sort of, knowledge-sharing platforms, or, the Erasmus Mundus Joseph has indicated? Is there something similar going on in Mexico?
Yes, well, I think that first we need to send abroad people, scientists who wants to be, especially in energy, marine energies. I made a sabbatical year in Spain last year, and I could make a comparison between the education that they have in the United Kingdom, in France, in Spain, and in Mexico, and I think that there are many programs that we can follow with our students in those countries, except for Mexico.
And on a last note, we are also supposed to talk about finance and funding sources. What is your view there in Mexico?
Well, for capacity building, we have the national system of science and technology, and we get some grants. That's not a problem. Where I think that we have a problem is to follow the planning tool, the MSP process. To continue with the management tool, we need political will first. Second, we need funds to do it. And I think that we will look after that, because it's really necessary. Otherwise, we will stay like this, with a planning tool, and nothing happens. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Norma, to give us the perspective from Mexico. And on that note, I would like to sort of, move to Dr. Badal Reza, Director General from the Prime Minister's Office Department of the Continental Shelf, dealing with the Maritime Zone Administration of Mauritius. You're here, that's the key institute that oversees activities for the joint management area of the Mascarene Plateau region between Mauritius and Seychelles. And I think what is also very interesting is that you have been heavily involved in sort of trying to build up an ocean expert network, sort of across 3 different continents, I understood. So, Badak, the floor is yours.
Good day to everybody. So for today's presentation, I'm going to talk to you about our own experience in terms of where we've reached in terms of maritime and spatial planning in Mauritius. Oops. Okay. So to start with, let's deal with some figures and try to get acquainted with what Mauritius is all about in terms of population. We are not that big, 1.3 million. We've got a labor force of 600,000, and what's our worth in terms of revenue? So we are about, let's say, 1,000 Canadian dollar average earnings. So we've got major sectors in terms of economic development. We started, I would say, in the 60s, 70s with the primary sector as one of the guiding industry. But then over the years, things change and we've got diversified. So now we have the tertiary sectors who's taking the lead in terms of tourism, the financial sectors, and all the service sectors that comes along with the tertiary. Of course, in the 80s, we had what we call the Mauritius economic miracles, which started with the textile industry. So now this is kind of, that's a game changer in terms of where we go in terms of economics. And that's a challenge to government now in terms of how do we push forward our economic growth looking now forward. So that's one of the reasons why we now try to look, I would say, further into the blue area. But in Mauritius, mind you, we don't use the term blue economy. My friend from Spatial wouldn't agree with me, but we've coined the word ocean economy rather. So for the very reason that if you look at Mauritius, it's a tiny island, about 2,000 square kilometers. But when you look at the EZ, it's about 1,000 times the size of the land. So the ratio is quite amazing, and you would see there's 2.3 million square kilometers in terms of the EZ. And to add on that, we've now shared a joint plateau with Seychelles, which is about 400,000 square kilometers. So in that respect, so about, I would say, right at the beginning of 2000, we realized that our frontier was not just lying ashore, so we had to look into the deeper blue. So we thought ocean economy would be one sector that we need really to maximize and gain the potential for our own development if we were to survive in this very competing world. So one of the good things about having to talk late after 3 days, so I don't need to tell you what are the definition of marine spatial planning, though we prefer the one that our friend from ELE talk about in terms of integrating ecosystem. And neither do I have to talk about the ecosystem-based approach, which we will promote, of course. And, of course, we don't have to talk about the 10-step approach to marine spatial planning, which we are trying to adopt. But get into the subject straight away, where we are in terms of marine spatial planning and what we expect from that. So basically what we're looking at is to come up with a kind of a plan for our own EZ. Well, starting with some priority areas, first of all. Are we starting on a clean slate? As one of my friends, I think another colleague previously mentioned about that. In 2013, Mauritius embarked into its journey for the development of the ocean economy. So we had about 400 people gathered in as big as this room to come up with what we call the Ocean Economy Roadmap. And there we decided in terms of what will be the clusters, the economics cluster that we need to really focus into to get this moving on. So I have here listed in terms of those sectors, 1 to 8, you can see them, starting with exploration, going up to the knowledge cluster. These are the prime, I would say, priorities that came up during this conference of 2013. But down the road after 4 years, how do we stand now? So this is where I would say in terms of the marine spatial planning, each sector-wise, we had to, in a way, embark into spatial planning, we want it or not. So that's for example, if you look at the exploration sector, we had to, in a way, to zone the area. Mauritius, in fact, launched what we call an expression of interest to start looking at what's really lying beneath in terms of, let's say, natural resource potential. So we've demarcated areas where we wanted to have, let's say, a first exploration surveys in terms of seismic surveys, bathymetries, and all the geophysical things that come along to be able to at least tap into and map the seafloor. So that's for the seabed area. But just recently, Mauritius, we had an issue in terms of, I would say, near the coastal environment, where we had to really have what I call MSP in action. That's Port Louis, the capital of Mauritius. And we have the harbor just sitting there. And we had one of the project development in terms of what we call the deep ocean water application. And this project calls upon pumping deep water from, let's say, 1,000 meters deep to come on shore and then to use it for air cooling facilities right in the capital where we had a number of economic activities going on. So the major problem we had is, told you about it, we got a port harbor sitting just there, and the place we wanted to cool was, of course, the capital, which is just close to the harbor. How do we manage to get this water there and having to cross along the, I would say, the harbor itself and place an area of the sea where we would actually have this water being pumped out? So we had to demarcate, in a sense, what we call a concession area. There we go. That's a small circle, where we had to choose, for example, having scientific-based evidence where we could actually tap in this 1,000 meters deep water, and at the same time place the legal framework, that is, having our regulation an area which is demarcated as an area of the sea where such kind of activities can be undertaken. So I would say that was one of the first insight into marine spatial planning, but it didn't end here. So we had the area demarcated, but how to bring it on shore now? So this is where we had to call on, I would say, all the stakeholders, be it from the port area, the shipping area, all the users in the port in this region to come along and place what I call a simple pipe laying exercise. It would have been very easy just to get it on paper and draw it, but how you make that into practice was the real difficulty to gain, a consensus between all those stakeholders and get that going on. So finally, we managed, after I would say, let's say 2 or 3 months of discussion, we managed to get that running through what we call a non-anchoring zone. So that's one of the examples. The other things that we are trying to look at is in the area, in the field, I would say cluster rather, of seafood. Seafood sector is, of course, one of the promising areas we want to develop. It's about 4% of the total 11% of ocean economy GDP. And we've demarcated in terms of areas where we would actually want our sea farm to be located. So these are about 20 sites, but we've added some 12 more to that. But already we are seeing some conflicting issues with, for example, the tourism sector. The marinas, where are they going to be located with respect to the, I would say, the farming zones? So these issues are now, I would say, boiling on the table, so we need to come up with a solution for that. Then, I don't know if you're aware of, but our Prime Minister was among the first one who went to New York and got this sign of the protocol, the 20% or 10% target. I think Julian mentioned about it, 14.5 target. Yep. So we have to reach this target by 2020, and how are we going to tackle that? So we made a small count in terms of our own marine park, marine protected areas, and being tiny in terms of land space. So all our protected zone, of course, is very close to the land. So at the end of the day, that's a marine park here. We came up with about less than 1% of the target. So how are we going to reach that in time? That's our real challenge. And we are looking forward now how we put up the strategies to build up that. But having realized all these issues, we had to have what we call the institutional framework for that. So we put up a cabinet paper and where we wanted to secure the political will. So cabinet make a decision that they now have decided to go and implement what we call a marine special plan for EEZ of Mauritius. A number of important words there, but all have been discussed during this conference. So at the level of, I would say, top government, there is a decision now for Mauritius to go forward with its MSP. And to do that, of course, there comes the issue of finance. And already we can say we've secured, I would say, a seed funding from the Indian Ocean Marine Association, which is an association of 23 members. Last year, Australia was the chair. I think Indonesia is the one the chair now. And we are coming up with a project to look at what we call the central database for the MSP. So that's coming up very quickly. I think I'm running out of time, so Just of the interest for you, we have started our own, let's say, database system, and we're looking at how we've seen that the sensitivity mapping yesterday. So for the one of the region there, it's the Saharamara region, very known for its biodiversity. So these are the area that we've started collecting data for us to, let's say, to reinforce our own decision-making process. Skip all that, but what we really are looking forward now is what we call an end-to-end system, starting from observation till the e-planning process. World Bank, they've started doing a report on MSP for us, so we got a kind of, let's say, preliminary insight into it in terms of what will be the various options for us to go forward. We've mentioned about, I mean, from the conference, we've heard that we've discussed long-term planning versus implement-as-you-go approach. For us, it's going to be a mix of all that in terms of status. So I think we've run a questionnaire survey already, so we're looking forward to get some result from that. But basically what we are trying to put forward now is a kind of a coordinating committee where we have all these technical group working on separate issues, which all will come together into a, let's say, complete picture to be able to resolve the whole planning process. Thank you. I'm very sorry to be a bit beyond my time.
Thank you, Mr. Reza, but I think that still there should be time for one question, follow-up question. I knew your slides before, so in fact, in terms of institutional capacity, I mean, you were now mentioning this, the working group, etc. This is what you want to do, but you also mentioned here challenges in terms of training, data gaps, etc. So where do you see now the main challenge in your place in terms of institutional capacities? Are they there? You know, how do you want to go about it?
Well, the thing that I mentioned in the beginning is that we had this option of going a full, let's say, plan for 4 years and then have it on the table, or do we resolve issues as it comes along? And we've, you know, Mauritius is running and you've got a number of political issues. The government is here for 5 years. They've got a plan. And so you have to implement. So we do all these pressures and we resolve them as they come, but also we trying to put up a long-term plan. And this long-term planning, of course, this is where we had the number of various gaps identified in terms of training capacity. The very good thing I would say in Mauritius is we did a survey, we have about, a tiny island, about 30 institutions involved in marine issues. So we were quite amazed with that. And each and every one wants to really, I mean, being an island state, well, now we call ourselves an ocean state rather than an island one. So everyone has a share and a stake in that. So there is this, I would say, already this interest from all and each and every one to embark into this new adventure. Already you have this well, which is the positive part of it. And the youngsters now, in terms, we have this cluster, the Ocean Knowledge Cluster, which is doing, I would say, great work. We even had a new faculty of ocean put in place at the local university. There is a number of exchange programs. Yesterday, I wasn't in Mauritius, but our colleague from Southampton was in Mauritius, so this is already happening. Next week, there is going to be a conference on the regional, I would say, association that I mentioned, the Indian Ocean Rim Association, where 23 members will be coming together. I would say it's the ocean economy is high on the agenda, and MSP is, though we didn't put it right in the beginning, 2013, but we realized that MSP is something that you can't do about. You want it or not, it's going to be there.
Okay, thank you. I mean, I think that what is already emerging here is from the talks we have seen, there's certainly not a lack of institutions, but the question is on how to coordinate them and to get the capacities together. Okay, and on that note, I would like to give the floor to our last speaker from Vietnam. I'm apologizing for probably not spelling your right, to pronounce your name correctly, Dr. Nguyen Chu Hoi from the Department of Environmental Management of the Vietnam National University. And you have actually a PhD, which you did in Poland. And so you have also a variety of experience. And you have been in numerous projects supporting MSP processes. So we are very much looking forward to your presentation on your experience with MSP in Vietnam.
Thank you, everybody. So I would like to share with you some lesson from Vietnam regarding to the capacity building for a marine space and planning application. So the first, so why the Vietnam apply the MSP? So you know, so Vietnam is a maritime country, and our sea rich in the natural resources and also the very beautiful. And the coastal and marine economy have importantly contributed to the national economy of our country. Recently, so the marine economy contributed to the about 22% of the GDP, total GDP of the country. And the coast and the sea of the Vietnam are rich also and beautiful. And so, some picture from Vietnam sea and the coast. But a number of different issues in the the marine environment in Vietnam, for example, the marine transport, oil and gas, marine tourism, fishery and aquaculture, wind farm, and solar energy. So, but all these sector needs a space for themselves. So, increases space and EU conflict in the context of multi-EU in the sea. So our government focused on the changing the traditional marine management by the sectoral management into the space and marine management. And so why we need the new tool? So MSP, we think about the very key new tool for marine space and management in our future. So since the year 2009, we joined with the ioc-unesco, and after that, so we applied the ioc-unesco guideline on MSP in the first site in Hạ Long Bay. And after that, so in year 2010, we have translated the ioc-unesco guideline on MSP into Vietnamese language. And after that, in the year 2013, UNEP-COP-SIDA regional project on capacity building for East Asia Sea to apply MSP, and also Vietnam were one of the participating countries in this project. So the project focused more on the coastal space and planning. So we also the testing MPA application in the 10 coastal provinces under the support of the National Ocean Administration and Atmosphere in the America, and also supported by the World Bank. Now the project supported by World Bank is ongoing, and also by SIDA from Sweden. So the MSP, we prepare another MSP document in Vietnamese language, and also the apply also the in English document for Vietnam. You see here some our data and some training code joined with the ioc-unesco by Dr. Bert Fowler, and also the COPSI and some our other project and support from government training. So how we apply some activity of capacity building to MSP in Vietnam. So you see here, so first we translation of the ioc-unesco guideline on the MSP in Vietnamese language, and the second we prepared the national and published the national resources document and some training module. And after that, so under the outside international support for the NOAA World Bank, we conducted some pilot site, and we focus on so the human resources development at central and local level. Not of training course and in university following of the project also. So MSP lecture have been prepared and published in some university and national program and local project. We survey to provide so scientific input for MSP. So we also the focus on the established coordinating agency. So in Vietnam, so at the highest level of the planning generally, so the Ministry of Investment and Planning, and under the ZIC, so for the MSP, so we established the Vietnam Administration of Sea Island as a focal point coordinating agency for the MSP. And we also the focus on MSP legal corridor input in some MSP in some the law. The first law of the Vietnam Sea approved by the National Assembly in the year 2012. In this law, so we focus the name not MSP, it is the CU planning. So the second law, it is the law of marine environment and resources approved by National Assembly in the year 2015. The law so focus the ICM and the coastal space and zoning in some the chapter of law. And recently, we are preparing the draft of law planning. So the MSP, the same name MSP Marine Space and Planning, have to put in the law draft, and now the law is considering by the National Assembly, and I hope in this year the law planning, including the MSP, will be approved by the National Assembly. This is very important for us. So you see in the map, look at in the map, we have now 10 pilot sites in coastal provinces, from north to south, supported by the government and supported by the World Bank project. And so we are now preparing the MSP for a whole country, focused on the territorial water, marine waters and internal marine waters for our own country. And the MSP, national MSP, also the prepared and drafted. Now is a consideration of the National Assembly for approval. So what the lesson learned on MSP? So you see, so the first we focus human resources development at MSP through short training course and in university. Also for the master science and PhD course. The MSP planner should be skilled in MSP process, including also zoning, mapping in the GIS and remote sensing and planning, make plan for a marine spatial plan. MSP is a process, not a project, so stakeholder and the local community involvement in the MSP process is very important but difficult. Institutional capacity and creating legal corridor for the MSP application. For example, coordination, governance, finance, sustainable financing mechanism is very important. And also capacity building in the preparatory of the input for is very important. We like of the scientific input for the MSP, and we need also the revise the international it means the IOC UNESCO guideline for MSP application, effective application in the worldwide. And thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your presentation. I like very much also that you have sort of now established a cycle. I mean, we always talk about the MSP cycle, but also a cycle in terms of the capacity building. So in terms of that, once you have gone through the cycle, that actually also the guidelines, the step-by-step approach may have to be adapted in order to sort of, come up with new reality, etc. On that note, I would really like to open the floor to the audience now. I have problems to, see, what kind of questions sort of are coming up and which ones. Okay, so Annie, from the Ministry of Finance from Estonia. So, I mean, her question is, and it's very much liked, and I would like to give it to you. What is a maritime spatial planner? What are the 3 most important competences of a maritime spatial planner? And, perhaps I give it to Joseph first. I mean, in terms of your course and now reality with SimCALD, have you learned the right stuff? And, what do you think are the 3 most important competences?
I think that's an interesting one to define who a maritime spatial planner is. Well, in some way, I'll say jack of all trades, master of none. Just to emphasize that as a planner, you're supposed to know all aspects of the marine area in terms of delivering a maritime spatial plan, in terms of the social, ecological aspect of it. But in terms of talking about the competences, I think that a maritime spatial planner should be a facilitator. And also in terms of being someone who is a visionary, looking into the future of the marine area, and also how your plan actually can be still resilient in the future. So I'll just focus on these 2 competences as someone who is a maritime spatial planner.
And please, comments.
Hello. I would just add to that, for me, marine planner is not one person. It's a whole bunch of institutions together that's trying to get to one common goal. Of course, you need people like you to be trained, to have the ingredient, to know the intricacies of all the issues. And so that's something that is done collegially, I would say.
Would you agree, Norma, I mean, in terms of the 3 most important competences a maritime spatial planner or a maritime spatial planning team should have?
Thank you, Angela. Well, I think that, first of all, the planner should have vision about the problem, should know the area, the marine science. Otherwise, it's very difficult for me to think about to plan the forest if my profession is not that. And secondly, to know at least the basis of the legal framework that goes together with the MSP process.
Okay. And, you would like to add in terms of your experience in Vietnam?
So in Vietnam, we understand MSP only at national level. So at the local level and small scale, so we apply only zoning. So in the Vietnamese law draft of planning, so MSP is one of them, but only apply in the national level. And based on this, so because the MSP focus the long-term, strategic, and very long term. And also the focus on the conflict, space and EU conflict in the sea, and the MSP oriented the direction for other differing sector to EU in this area. So the MSP becomes a national tool to control the sea EU of the different sector and the community.
Okay, Norma, you mentioned vision, so a planner should have a vision. Do you feel in terms of institutional capacity, but also sort of, team capacity, that there's still sort of something to be done there in terms of, building up capacities to, create visions?
Well, I think that the vision is going together with the capacity to listen people, to get advice from other ones, to talk face to face with the people, to think that not only your opinion is important, to know what kind of professional you need to go further, and particularly to think that the MSP process is an interdisciplinary work, not only one-way work.
Okay. So I think that, from your answers, but I see also here sort of the questions coming up that, that also MSP is very much about social sciences. Is the emphasis perhaps a little bit too much on sort of, natural sciences, not only knowing the ocean data, but also knowing how to interact with the human beings? What would be your reaction? So would it be useful to have more sociology, psychology, empathy included in MSP curricula? What would be your reaction? Anyone?
Yeah, I think it's important, but I'll just take it from the point of view of sometimes to the duration that you have for these courses. And I think that it's important that although it should be represented in the course content, but you also look at the duration for the courses and which ones of these disciplines should be applied in the area. So I think some of these things sometimes come out when you start doing it on the practical level, then you get experience from it too as well, which I think is also an important aspect of it.
And I understood it was ingrained in the Erasmus Mundus by sort of having already the diverse people inside the Erasmus Mundus. You mentioned that this, and the cultural experience of the different countries, that was sort of an important part of the course. Norma, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, I think that the people is right, because normally we are talking about the human being that is responsible for many problems that we have all around the world. And most of the time we forget that the social science are there. And the people needs to be together with us in the same way that economic area that should be together with us. Otherwise, we cannot speak about sustainability.
Okay. So that was on the plenaire level. We talk about institutional capacity. What would you see, in terms of then how should the institution, which is guiding the MSP process, should look like? How should it sort of, what kind of capacity building is required on that level? What would you say in terms of vision, psychology, etc.? Any reaction?
Well, I think that, like I said, the interdisciplinary work, you need to go further with the capacities of our students to don't follow only one line, economic or natural science. They need to have integral education to be able to work on this area.
Okay.
Well, just to add, for our case, it would be access to information and having a wide as possible a database in place. And there you'll get the issue of data sharing protocols that may crop up that we've talked about previously. So how the challenge would be how to set up for us it will be kind of a centralized system where you have information that comes in with a certain value added to those information for us to be able to make decision. So that's the kind of approach. So that everybody, I mean, each stakeholders see their role in terms of their involvement within this confined space, I would say, and come up with one decision that would serve the country, I would say, within the world.
Okay. Thank you. On that note, I would still like to also look into the audience. I saw one question here, please.
Thank you. Joanna Smith from the Nature Conservancy. And my question is for Dr. Hoy from Vietnam. Very interesting presentation. Thank you. With the map that you showed with all of the different regions on the coast of Vietnam, I was wondering, in terms of capacity and the design of your process, are you having, what kind of capacity do you need in order to design the plan over that spatial area with that many different, I don't know if they were states or provinces or districts? Do you understand the question? It's easier to see with the map. Are you having do you have to have capacity so that you can have consultations in each individual area, or is it done as a region?
Okay, thank you for your question. So in Vietnam now we apply at coastal provincial level at 10 coastal per the 28 province in Vietnam, coastal province. So regarding to the capacity building, so we have a training course for not only for we have a cluster for the 3 province, so we combine so one side, so we have some other costs in different, and also we established first MSP team, and we focus other document. And for the leader, other document, only awareness and understanding about the MSP. But for technical team, so we focus on skill of the MSP process training, for example. So we involve so scientific, academic, university regarding to the marine science and planning, so involved to the process of the planning and training also.
Okay, thank you. I saw more question. Yves, please. No.
Oui, bonjour, Yves-Henri Renas, du secrétariat général de la mer France. Donc nous avons eu ce matin plusieurs interventions sur des projets de planification transnationaux. C'est d'ailleurs un des apports de l'Union européenne d'avoir prévu dans la directive la coopération transnationale. Donc la question que je voudrais poser, c'est quel doit être le rôle respectif des experts et des diplomates dans cette coopération dans la planification internationale. Merci.
Who would like to answer? I think, Mr. Reza, you have
Well, I understand the question was what would be the role of experts and people from the diplomacy cadre. For us, I mean, if you take for the example of Mauritius and Seychelles, this is an area where we've benefited quite extensively, I would say, from international expertise and even from diplomats to be able to make our two countries to come into one table and do the discussion. So that's, I would say, a living example of where those kind of expertise have been really beneficial to the relationship that we have tried to inculcate in terms of bringing trust that we mentioned. And more important is what would be the specific, let's say, when it comes to legal framework. The very first thing that when you go into cross-boundary issues, you are hit with kind of jurisdictional problem issues. And there is the relevance of what would be the relevant convention, the relevant legal formula, because you're dealing with an area where there may not be existing national laws or I would say regulating mechanism. So you have to come up with your own kind of framework, if I may say so. Maybe it's a mixture of, in our case, Mauritius and Seychelles, we did come out with it's a new world, with a new, I would say, legal structure. We got a new treaty that even if you look at, for example, the fiscal and taxation regime within this area, here we talk of a mixture of Mauritius laws and Seychelles laws and even international laws. So there are issues where you do have to look at various other models outside your own boundary so that you can further up those kind of relationships. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And I have one last question from Helena, from Erasmus Mundus. So.
Thank you, Angela. First of all, thank you, Kofi, for the presentation. None of the teachers would present that master's with such enthusiasm, so thank you very much. My question, though, on training and education will not go to Joseph. It has been said that funding is hugely important, and that wonderful program, the Erasmus Mundus, funds very few European students compared to the rest of the world. So in fact, at the end of the program, we'll end up with the rest of the world being trained by Europe, and Europe will have no trainees done by Europe. That being said, I would like to hear from the other speakers. In your own countries, how is funding for education and training? Do you involve privates? Is there room for industry to jump in and finance education and training? Or is it mainly public? Thank you.
Okay, and I give this, and perhaps that you sort of, we have to close soon, so please, Norma, I think you start.
Okay, in Mexico, we have the National Council of Science and Technology, that is a public institution that gives grants for students, postgraduate students in master's or PhD, or even for staying abroad, a specific program. And the industry, normally as a private sector, they don't give grants, but we have a program, a postgraduate program that we call Industry University Program. And then half of the education is given by the industry and the other half by the public institutions. Then we have a mix, but it's always in this combination. Or we have grants abroad offered by other countries like France, United States, that you can apply and you go into an application that is after an interview that you get with some other person, and they say, well, you are able to get the grant or not. But normally it's the way that we are working in Mexico, or our grants, or grants that they are offered by many institutions or many other embassies or countries around the world.
You want to add into this?
In the case of Vietnam, so in my university and some other, we link the MSP lecture into the Master Science Training Course program on the marine ecology and or the Master Science program on the ocean governance, for example. So I think we can involve students and other staff from the governmental agency come to the program for MSP and other. I think that this is very important. It means that we incorporated the MSP into the training course at the university program.
Okay, and I think that, now more and more questions are coming up. That's always sort of with discussions, but at the same time, sort of lunch is awaiting us. So on that note, I would really like to have sort of a final round in terms of, the organizers of this conference, so IOC, UNESCO, European Commission. What kind of recommendations would you like to give to them in terms of next steps to be taken in terms of institutional capacity building, and what kind of role may knowledge-sharing platforms, play? So really just a very quick round,
I think I already talked about training diversification in terms of holding summer schools, training programs all around the world to kind of kickstart MSP even. So I think UNESCO and IOC can play that important role in terms of MSP education and training.
So training for professionals.
Exactly.
And sort of shorter than not only master's programs. Okay?
Well, I think that this training for professionals can be a tool for IOC to go further with the MSP processes around the world. And I think that 2030 is a very close time to be ready with the percentage that they want to have as MSP processes. And I would like to see more than this, this goal, Julian.
For me, the main difference is when you compare it to land area, the ocean is a dynamic environment, and the only constant there is change. So for me, an MSP is and has to be something which is adaptive. And for us, so we have to keep that in mind whenever we have any plan. So there always have to be, in all our legal framework or institutional setup, there has to be a way for us to readapt and to rework it.
Okay, so to keep that in mind. And now, last word to you. So
in Vietnam, the MSP set up in the draft law of the planning. If the law approves in this year, so after the approval, we have to prepare a lot of the guideline. And I think the international, especially IOC, UNESCO guideline can assist more. So we also the help from this law. We have money from government because the government identify the MSP is it a public mission, not a private mission. So government provide money for this activity.
Okay, well, thank you also for your last recommendations. I think that they will sort of, travel on to the last, plenary session in the final round. It's a 1-hour break, and, then we will move into ocean planning in areas beyond national jurisdiction. Thank you very much.